Hello, Tim Wilmot here, and welcome to my watercolor demonstration. This time, a loose approach to painting cars. So this is a scene of a little town called Bergerac in the southwest France, or not too small, it's actually a medium-sized town. So typical French square. Good from a watercolor point of view because we've got lots of tonal differences. For example, the light hitting the cars, the rooftops of the cars there, very dark shadows below, the darker buildings behind, bit of contrast between the dark buildings and the tops of the cars, maybe a little bit of light hitting the tops of the rooftops here, on this background building and on this right building. I'll also introduce a figure somewhere over here. Not those two figures, they're a little bit too distant, but something a little bit closer to us. Again, a bit of tonal contrast between that figure and the darker background. So we'll play on that a little bit. We've got this street furniture, there's the street signs here. So for example, this one is doing a good job at connecting the foreground with the background, as indeed is this street light here. Good job at connecting different elements of the picture, and bits of light as well will emphasize the bit of light touching the top of the, reflecting off the top of that street sign there. And there's a little bit of light here on these street lights as well. Would look good against the darker background. There's also a bit of exercise in perspective with this building. You can see with the curvature of the rooftop there, just sort of going around the corner, but a little bit of perspective there with the different sizes, the windows getting slightly larger coming towards us, and the marking around the parking bays here. So nice couple of lines, few lines there leading us into the picture. Also, from a composition point of view, there's this tree's doing a good job of framing the left-hand side, and then we've got this building on the right-hand side. So there's a nice feeling of enclosure here within this small sheltered square. So a nice sunny, summery scene, and lots of opportunities to play around with contrast and lights and darks. So we'll see how we get on. So the paper I'm using in this demonstration is Saunders Waterford. It's cold press paper, and it's 15 inches by 11 inches. It's 300 grams in weight, 140 pounds. I'm using, as I normally do for doing the outline sketch, I'm using a 3B pencil, so quite a soft pencil, and starting with the outline of the rooftops. So with this outline sketch, I'm just getting in the basic main elements, the basic shapes of the things in the painting. And with the 3B pencil, that's being quite dark, it's going to show through some of the washes. I don't mind the pencil lines showing through in the end painting. I think that's maybe one of the charms of a watercolor, particularly a loose watercolor done in this fashion. So finish with the right-hand building, and now for the cars. So first of all, that middle car and the rooftop. So I'm actually drawing in the shapes of where the light is going to be, the windscreen, the darker windscreen, and then the main body of the car coming down to street level, getting a little wheel there. Another nice thing about these cars is that they're all pointing in different directions. So we've got the left-hand one, for example, is pointing slightly into the right, this right-hand one pointing slightly into the left, and then the one in the middle, the back facing towards us. Now this figure on the on the right-hand side, just a little figure just to help give us some scale and a bit more interest in the painting. And very often when you've done some cars and then you want to introduce some figures, getting the size of the figure right, having done the cars first, that's going to help you with the scales. So for example here, the shoulder of that figure is approximately the height of some of the cars. So that does help us a little bit. Now I've introduced some cars in the back. Let's get in the outline of the shadows of these cars as well. Just a few marks to help me with the marking bays, and we're done. So I start off first of all with the sky, and I'm using a mop brush here. This is a Raphael, that the maker of the brush is Raphael, and it's a synthetic brush, got very good water retention features, and has a nice straight edge to it as well. So notice first of all I just dragged the brush across the sky, picking up a bit of a dirty wash from a previous painting, and then afterwards did a similar thing with some blue. The colours I'm using in the palette from the top is a neutral tint, then coming down got burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt, green, cerulean blue in the middle, then a cobalt blue as I just used there, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a bright red, a Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange, and a lemon yellow down the bottom. So I brought the sky down into the rooftops, over the rooftops, and then now I'm painting in the building, the base colour of the buildings, just trying to get those sort of yellow ochreish colours typical of French, these French buildings here. Carefully paint around the tops of the cars because I want to have them nice and crisp, a nice reflection of the light. So while the buildings are still moist, I'm adding in extra colour, and then just let them bleed in to each other. I've got a slight slope on this board as well. It's about 10 or 15%. So after the buildings, I'm now doing the wash of the initial wash. Well, this is going to be the colour of the road surface, and this is a warmish mixture of mainly alizarin crimson, a bit of ultramarine blue. Try and make it a bit more intense as we come towards us, and just dragging, again using almost the side of the brush. It's at a 45-degree angle, dragging it quickly across the paper. Now this is not rough paper, this is the medium texture, but I'm still getting a few little sparkles appearing there. Do you see? Which would be more so if I had rough paper, but I tend to prefer the cold press, having that slightly smoother surface. So that will be it for the road. Now just picking up some of the accumulation of that wash that's come down there. I've now speeded up the video. I've let everything dry. I put the hairdryer on it just to make sure everything is 100% dry. And now for the next stage, which will be the rooftops and the buildings. We'll sort of work down top to bottom, start with the top, as I say, the rooftops, and this is our first opportunity to introduce a little bit of light hitting some of the windows. The brush I'm using is another Raphael brush, sort of medium-sized one, this one. This is, I think this is a number 4. And like all the Raphael matte brush, I find it's got a very nice sharp edge. So that's that left-hand building. Now it's slightly more tricky with the right-hand building, with that series of rooftop windows protruding out. So I just gave a few marks to indicate those. So the colour of the rooftops are sort of warmish, reddish brown mix. And I just, as I'm going over the rooftops, I'll try and introduce different colours, a bit of ultramarine blue, a bit of alizarin crimson. So a bit of alizarin crimson there. Try and get a nice point to the apex of the roof. And then over to that right-hand building. Just define those windows there, left and right. And the base of the roof. Now over to this right-hand building. And thinking about perspective, this is really the benefit of making sure the initial drawing is spot on before going on to starting your painting, is making sure you've got the right framework and things like perspective are sorted out and resolved before you start painting. Otherwise it can go horribly wrong if you haven't got those outlines to help you. So we've got the roof going up to the right. Now I'm thinking about this second window on this roof, and thinking about where is the light coming from, where's the light going to hit, where is it going to be lighter, where's the shadow going to be, because the roof is at an angle, thinking about the direction of those shadows as well. So now to the buildings and adding on a second layer, very similar to the first layer in a way, with the use of the sort of the warmish tones, yellow ochre, and going right up to the rooftop. It doesn't matter if they bleed into each other. And then around to the left at the base of that tree, the tree will come over this line. And there's quite a prominent red signage above this corner building, so I've just given a hint of that with some bright red there. Not too precise. And down to the rooftops of the cars. And the gaps between the cars. Now the gap between that left-hand building and the middle building, bridge the gap, connect the two together, and as we did with the left-hand building, just adding in a darker mix of what we had before, but want to try and get the feeling of a nice bit of glow striking the front of this building, so it's sort of the sunlight's coming towards us, it's bouncing off the cars, it's bouncing off different objects, it's being reflected back onto this building, and so that's why I've added a bit more yellow into that, a bit brighter than the one on the left. And we need to get a little bit darker towards the base of this middle building. So that top mixing area there, I've got basically a bit of neutral tint going on there and a darker mix. So sometimes I'll just go back into that if I want to get it darker, pull up some neat neutral tint on its own. This will dry a good bit lighter than this, so you've got to try and think about compensating that when you're mixing the colours. Perhaps go a little bit more intense than you think, because things, as I say, things are going to dry lighter, so that's why I've gone quite dark there. No, quite dark in the corner as well at street level, which might give us a little bit of contrast. And then right-hand building, as with the other two, mixing different colours. Don't need to be too precise with that edge. They can bleed in with each other. And then a little bit darker towards the base again. Paint around the top of this figure, which is going to be the head and the shoulders. They're going to be in contrast, brightly lit against the darker background. So everything's still moist still. I can go back into those areas and touch them up a little bit and add more pigment in. So now with the vehicles. So there is this far left-hand one, which I was debating whether to include that or exclude it, but it's in there anyway. Just a hint of a vehicle on the left-hand side. Then this main one on the left-hand side, which I changed from that quite large Volkswagen people carrier. I think it's a Volkswagen Touran or similar. Anyway, have this middle car, slightly different colour. So the left-hand one maybe a sort of silverish blue. This middle one, a warmer reddish colour. Might keep the windscreen of that middle one unpainted. Likewise, this right-hand car here. Haven't determined yet whether this right car is coming towards us or going away, but it's a darker value. And I mean, what this painting is all about is a loose approach to drawing vehicles, and these vehicles are a lot easier to paint when we're painting the backs of them or the front of them. A side elevation, a bit more tricky to do, but it's all about painting it in a loose style. And this is true now when we're coming to the shadows. So we've gone in with the base color of the body of the cars. Everything is still moist. There's a slight slope on the board here, and then we're going in with a thicker, darker mix now for the shadows, and it's going against gravity. It's meeting as I'm putting down that darker mix. It's going up and bleeding in with the color of the car and giving some quite pleasing effects from a watercolor point of view. Then there's a little bit of curb coming out from that vehicle just to help us connect things together. And then the shadow. Sometimes I'll leave a little bit of a gap between the bottom of the car and the shadow just to have a little bit of light coming through, which sometimes you'll get depending on how high you are, where your eye level compared to these cars. We're sort of looking slightly down on top of them, so there's not too much of those gaps underneath the chassis. Right, figure. So smaller synthetic brush here, get in the face, and then quickly do a couple of arms. And the body of the figure, slightly sort of bluish mix, leaving the shadows. So we've still got that bit of light, do you see, on the top of the head and the shoulders. If I didn't have that bit of highlight there, or if I painted over it, doesn't matter. We can cheat a little bit and use a bit of white gouache just to at the very end, just to give that impression of the bright light hitting it. Now thinking about the shadow going slightly over to the right there, so the sun is slap bang in the middle above us. So objects to the left, the shadows will go out slightly to the left. Objects to the right, slightly over to the right. I'm just putting in now this post, and I just lifted out some of the colour of the car, which is still moist, so you can lift it out with this small synthetic brush, and then at the base of the post a bit of a shadow. Now, next step, the tree, this large tree on the left hand side. So I'm making up my own green, bit of ultramarine blue, of course yellow, bit of burnt sienna just to darken up the mix a bit. Starting in the top left corner where it's quite dark, and of course dark at the base. Now the brush I've got here is an old mop brush that's seen better days. I've chopped off the edge of this mop brush with a pair of nail scissors just to give it a really jagged edge. Hairs are continually coming out of it, which I don't mind. I can just lift those off when everything's dried if it's gone onto the paper. So really good for foliage effects, nice random leaf shapes, random shapes to that tree. We don't want to make it too symmetrical. And here, going quite dark, picking up neutral tint for the base, almost some dry brush strokes now. At the bottom there, and we need to get in the tree trunk. To just pop behind that left-hand car. So I've got a fairly medium-sized synthetic brush here, just using the side, a dry brush stroke, thinking about where the sun's coming from, the light's coming from the right, well, slightly from the right-hand side. So we've got that jagged right-hand edge, a sharp left-hand edge. Now, while I've got this brush, we can start adding in a bit more detail to the buildings, which are starting to dry up now, so there won't be too much mixing or bleeding going on. I'm not painting in all the windows, just a few of them, otherwise it would look too complicated, too much going on. We're trying to give a loose approach to this, so definitely not include all of the architectural details and windows on that building. Now the shop entrance on that far side there, just dragging down those dark lines to the tops of the cars, enhancing, got the dark against the light there, enhancing that a bit. Use the fingers just to smudge it a bit in a control way, of course, and a bit more on the left hand side. So it creates again another little bit of contrast against that lighter. Now this middle building and the curvature of the building as it's going around, so just a hint of it there where I started off. I'm not bothering painting in every single window, just a few lines to indicate that. And then some windows in that gap. Now this is going to be another street sign. I'll add some white gouache on the top of that at the end. Right hand building, the windows protruding out in the roof, so we've got a nice bit of shadow, almost a triangular shape, just thinking about the shapes, like a triangular shape there, and then hopefully immediately it gives that impression of the window popping out of the roof, and a nice bit of contrast between the light and the dark again. The curb of the pavement, and it wasn't one continuous line, I just lifted the brush off the paper as I dragged it around, so you've got a thinner line, thicker line, then it goes thin again, thick, thin. So it's not one continuous thickness. So just continue adding in a few marks here and there. Just check that wall is dry before I add in some shutters. So I've used a sort of cerulean blue, well it is cerulean blue for these shutters, and we'll define them a little bit more later on with some horizontal lines. So maybe these shutters, that second one is slightly closed. Now there's a balcony on this right hand building with some railings, so we'll just pop those in there. Just a few of them, like with the windows, just giving an impression of the continuous line of railings, not painting in every single rail, just a few of them where they're concentrated together, or where the light isn't catching them. Now a few windows on the right hand side, thinking about perspective, and not always a solid rectangle. Leave out a little bit, perhaps at the bottom where the light is catching a windowsill or a window frame. Shadow underneath, a few more lines just to help with perspective, leading the eye down into the picture. So while I've got this brush, just define that wheel a bit more, not too much. And then a few, as I normally do, towards the end with a street scene, do a few dry brush strokes, random lines, just to give the impression of tire marks and a bit more interest to that surface. What I'm doing now is just picked up some clear water, and with that medium-sized synthetic brush, I'm now splattering it on top of that tree, and with the slight gradient, with the slight slope, that's going to give us some pleasing effects as it's slowly dripping down. And if things aren't going too quickly or quickly enough, I'm reaching for the paper towel there and just lifting out some of that colour, which will hopefully just make it look a bit more convincing as a tree. Now, windscreen. So I'm not going to do all the cars' windscreens, just a few of them. So where the light may be less intense on that left-hand car, let's get a windscreen in there. Like the windows of the buildings, not a total coverage of the windscreen, just left a little bit of light there. Maybe something on the back parcel shelf catching some light, or something in the front catching light and showing through. And then another dark windscreen behind. Throws up a bit of contrast with the side of the vehicle. And then the tail lights. Just picked up that bright Windsor red. Okay, that car's going away from us, so they're all pointing away from us. Add a bit more definition to the back, the windows on that, the street level windows on that middle building, and painting around carefully this post. So that helps define that a little bit more, that top of that post. Right hand edge, again thinking about where the light's coming from. Let's put in another shop window. Just leave a few gaps. And then another dark window behind this figure, just to add a bit more contrast in between the light that's hitting that figure's shoulders, and just makes that figure pop out a little bit more. Now, those top two windows there, don't want to overdo it, still want to keep that loose feeling to it all, not too detailed. Of course, get in a little window between those two shutters, darker, a few lines underneath. Just a few more little vertical marks. Now, almost a final thing for these cars, add in a few bumpers. Which just makes them look a bit more car-like. and just a bit of a shadow in that wheel arch. Don't want to overdo it. Still try and keep it a loose approach. That the minute you're starting to add too much detail and thinking about it more, it's gonna lose that loose approach, that fresh look to it. Horizontal line, which helps connect those two cars together. Just a few vertical marks there to give the impression of some rooftop windows. Let's add in a diagonal line up here to the top of the roof. A few aerials here and there. Let's put in a little horizontal line there across that, which just helps perhaps define that post a bit more, leaving that gap between the two. So the last step is to add in some highlights, which I use white gouache for. Well, actually in this painting I'm using some new paint that I've got. It's a mixture of white gouache and watercolor. It's from Shinhan, I think, and straight out the tube with the smallest brush I've got. So that background car there, I just added a bit more of a definition to the rooftop where it's catching the light. So we're just adding in a few more verticals, horizontals, tops of the street light, that post, the figure's head, adding a bit more definition to the figure's shoulders if it needed it. The left hand side of this post, particularly against the background of the darker car, the top of that sign, and again the left hand side of the supporting post for the sign. And then also I need to do the marks for the parking bay, which really does help us with the perspective and leading the eye into the picture. Getting slightly thicker as they come towards us, not continuous lines, dry brush strokes. So might need a few more marks on the building, just a few, not overdo it. It will dry a little bit lighter as well, it won't be so intense. A few marks on the shutters. Instantly gives it that French look and feel. Perhaps a few verticals where the light's catching those railings. So as I say, just a few marks to bring out, just to give us a bit more of an intense feeling of light. Try not to overdo it. Use it in moderation. And the last step is to rub out some of these pencil marks, which I don't often do, but I think it needs it in this picture just to give more of a block of that bright colour showing through. So where I haven't painted over the paper, I can rub out these lines with a rubber or an eraser and just scrape off some of the debris. And there we are, we're done. So I've just now got a photo of the finished painting, and alongside that, bottom right corner, the original source photo, just so we can see where we got to from that picture. So a simple scene, a small car park in southwest France. What have we covered? Well, and why did we choose this scene? Well, it was down to the composition. Felt it was a nice subject, quite a pretty scene, nice bordering on the left-hand side with the tree and the right-hand building, the focal points of the cars in the middle. So quite a nice subject from a composition point of view. From a watercolor perspective, we've got those different tonal differences, the light hitting particularly the middle car, the middle windscreen, and the value changes between the dark shadows underneath the cars and the road surface, and then the darker buildings behind. We added in those darker windows, door frames, window fronts, emphasizing those lights, particularly around that figure on the right hand side. We've got some perspective going on there with the building in the middle, and the lines, the vertical lines on the buildings, the lines of the marks around the parking bays. And it was all about a loose approach to painting cars, and my approach was to paint the end of the cars or the front of the cars. Of course, we've got a slight difference in angles of those cars, but essentially we're painting the end of the cars or the front of the cars, trying to avoid the side elevation, which is a little bit more tricky. Yes, of course it can be done. I've done it a few times before in some of my paintings, but I think this end approach, or particularly when you get in those brake lights as well, and a bit of bright reds, it just adds a bit more interest to the painting. So I hope you liked this demonstration video of a typical sort of street scene, French street scene, small car park. You can see more of my paintings up on my website, which is www.timwilmot.com, TIMWILMOT.com. Please get in touch with me via that site. Please add in comments, any comments you'd like to make, or any questions you've got about this video. Pop those comments down below. I may not be able to respond immediately, but I will respond within a week or two to every comment or question that's placed there. Please subscribe to the channel as well. As I say, see more of my stuff up on my website, and more information about the workshops and holidays that I'm running through the year. I can also do one-to-one demonstrations, workshops with you online as well, wherever you are in the world. Please let me know if you're interested in a one-to-one session. If you have any, if you want to talk something through, cover something, some tricky concept, technique in watercolor, please let me know. Maybe we can do that over a one-to-one session. So thanks for watching, and hopefully catch up with you soon on the next demo video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.